Standing alone at Juniper Creek Station, Caleb Morgan never expected three desperate, hollow-eyed orphans to shatter his carefully constructed solitude with a simple question about their dead uncle. The wealthy rancher's gruff command, "Get on my horse now, miss," would be the first step in healing wounds neither he nor the sisters knew could ever mend. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The dust from the train still hung in the air as Caleb Morgan stood on the platform of Juniper Creek Station, watching the locomotive disappear into the horizon. At 42, he cut an imposing figure, 6'3" of hard-earned muscle beneath a black Stetson that had weathered as many storms as the man who wore it. The late afternoon sun caught the silver threading through his dark beard, evidence of the years that had shaped him from a reckless young ranch hand into one of the wealthiest cattle barons in the Montana Territory. He checked his pocket watch, a family heirloom that had survived 3 generations of Morgan men. The train had arrived on time, but the cattle buyer he was supposed to meet hadn't been aboard. Caleb's jaw tightened in frustration. A wasted journey, and with winter closing in, every day away from Whispering Pines Ranch meant work piling up that couldn't wait for spring. "Mister? Please, mister." The small voice barely registered over the station's bustle, but something in its desperate tone made Caleb turn. 3 girls huddled together on a bench against the station wall, their clothes travel-worn and their faces smudged with the grime of a long journey. The oldest couldn't have been more than 12, her thin arms protectively around the shoulders of her sisters, one perhaps 9, the other barely 5. "You talking to me?" Caleb asked, his gruff voice softer than usual. The oldest girl nodded, her chin lifting with a courage that belied her trembling hands. "Yes, sir. You look like someone important, someone who might know things." Caleb almost smiled at that assessment. "I know some things. What are you needing to know?" "We're looking for Mr. Frederick Williams. He's supposed to meet us, but he isn't here." The girl's blue eyes held a combination of fear and determination that tugged at something long buried in Caleb's chest. "Do you know him?" Frederick Williams. The name hit Caleb like a physical blow. Old Fred Williams had owned the neighboring property to Whispering Pines for 30 years. They'd had their differences over water rights and grazing boundaries, but there'd been respect between them. Until 3 months ago, when Williams had been found dead in his barn, the victim of a stroke that had taken him without warning. "I knew Fred Williams," Caleb said carefully, studying the girls more closely now. They all shared the same wheat blonde hair and something in the shape of their eyes that seemed vaguely familiar. "But I'm afraid he passed away some months back. Who might you 3 be to him?" The oldest girl's face drained of color. Her arms tightened around her sisters as if bracing against a physical blow. "I'm Charlotte. These are my sisters, Josephine and little Emma. Mr. Williams was our mother's uncle, our only living relative." The youngest girl, Emma, began to cry softly, burying her face in Charlotte's threadbare coat. The middle one, Josephine, looked up at Caleb with wary eyes that had clearly seen more hardship than any child should. "What happened to your parents?" Caleb asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Influenza took them both last spring," Charlotte replied, her voice flat with the practiced tone of someone who had repeated a painful truth so many times it had become a recitation rather than a memory. "Mother wrote to Mr. Williams before she died. He sent money for our train tickets and said he'd take us in." Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through hair that needed cutting. The station was emptying now, the platform attendant casting impatient glances their way. Night would fall soon, bringing with it the bitter cold of a Montana October. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "Chicago, sir. We've been traveling 3 days." 3 girls, orphaned and alone, sent halfway across the country to a man who no longer lived. The unfairness of it struck Caleb hard. He'd seen his share of life's cruelties, had experienced enough of them firsthand, but something about these three vulnerable figures stirred a protective instinct he thought had died with Catherine and their unborn child 8 years ago. "You got any money left?" he asked. Charlotte hesitated, then shook her head. "We spent the last on bread yesterday." Caleb sighed, putting his hat back on with deliberate care as he made a decision that would change 4 lives forever. "My name is Caleb Morgan. I own Whispering Pines Ranch, which borders what was your great-uncle's property. I can't leave you here, and there's no orphanage in Juniper Creek. You'll have to come with me until we figure something out." Relief and suspicion warred on Charlotte's face. "Why would you help us? You don't know us." "I knew Fred Williams," Caleb replied simply, "and I know what it's like to be without options." He extended his hand. "I've got my wagon outside. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch, and it'll be dark soon. We should get moving." After a moment's hesitation, Charlotte took his hand and helped her sisters to their feet. The youngest still sniffled, clutching a threadbare rag doll to her chest. The middle one, Josephine, gathered their single battered suitcase, its weight nearly toppling her until Caleb gently took it from her hands. "It's not much," Charlotte said defensively, misreading his expression, "but it's all we have left." "It's more than I had when I started," Caleb replied, leading them toward the station exit. His wagon waited outside, the 2 chestnut draft horses stamping impatiently in the cooling air. Caleb lifted each girl into the wagon bed, which he'd lined with fresh hay and blankets for the cattle buyer who never came. As he helped the youngest up, she looked at him with wide, tearful eyes. "Are you going to be our new papa?" The question caught him off guard, stirring memories of Catherine's swollen belly and the tiny coffin that had held both her and their son. "No, little one," he said gently. "I'm just giving you a place to stay for now." The girl's face fell, and Caleb felt an unexpected pang. He turned to secure their meager baggage, using the moment to compose himself. When he climbed onto the driver's seat, he found Charlotte already seated beside him, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," she said formally. "But I want you to know we won't be a burden. I can cook and clean, and Josie's good with sewing. We'll work for our keep until we figure out what to do next." Caleb flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. "Let's worry about getting you fed and rested first. My housekeeper, Mrs. Larson, will have supper waiting. We can talk about the rest tomorrow." As the wagon rattled out of Juniper Creek, Caleb felt the weight of 3 young lives settling onto his shoulders. He'd built Whispering Pines from nothing, transforming a rundown property into 20,000 acres of the finest grazing land in the territory. He'd faced down rustlers, survived blizzards, and outlasted droughts. But nothing in his 4 decades had prepared him for the responsibility of 3 orphaned girls. Yet something about their presence in his wagon felt right in a way he couldn't explain, as if fate had finally called in the debt he'd owed since the day he'd buried Catherine and their unborn son. He'd built a ranch empire with no one to leave it to. Now, unexpectedly, his empty house would have voices in it again. The road to Whispering Pines stretched before them, winding through hills turned golden in the setting sun. Behind them, Juniper Creek Station faded into the distance, along with the lives the girls had known. Ahead lay an uncertain future that none of them could have imagined when the day began. Twilight had settled over the Montana hills by the time the wagon turned onto the long drive leading to Whispering Pines. The ranch house stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, a sprawling 2-story structure of rough-hewn timber and stone that Caleb had expanded 3 times since purchasing the original homestead. Lamplight glowed from several windows, and smoke curled from twin chimneys, promising warmth against the evening chill. In the wagon bed, Josephine and Emma had fallen asleep, huddled together beneath a horse blanket Caleb had thrown back to them. Charlotte remained awake beside him, her eyes widening as she took in the vastness of his property. "This is all yours?" she asked, unable to hide her awe as they passed a large barn, bunkhouses, and corrals where horses moved like shadows in the dusk. "Every acre," Caleb nodded. "Started with 160, a homestead claim when I was 20. Added to it when I could." "How many acres now?" "Just shy of 20,000. Charlotte's sharp intake of breath made him glance sideways. In the fading light, her profile reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. There was a delicacy to her features that belied the steel in her spine. "Your sister's holding up all right back there?" he asked. Charlotte turned to check. "They're asleep. It's been a long journey." "For you too," Caleb observed. "Yet here you are, still standing guard." Her chin lifted slightly. "I promised our mother I'd take care of them." Caleb nodded, understanding the weight of such promises. "And you will, but now you've got help." As they approached the house, the front door swung open. A stout woman in her 60s appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "About time you got back," Mrs. Larson called out. "Supper's been ready for—" She stopped short, noticing the girls. "Caleb Morgan, what have you gone and done now?" Caleb reined in the horses and set the brake. "Mrs. Larson, we have guests who'll be staying with us for a while." He jumped down from the wagon and moved to help the girls. "These young ladies are Charlotte, Josephine, and Emma. They're Fred Williams' great nieces." Mrs. Larson's face softened immediately. Old Fred's family, Lord rest his soul. She bustled down the porch steps. Come in, you poor dears must be half frozen and starving." Caleb lifted the still sleeping Emma into his arms, her small body surprisingly light against his chest. The child instinctively curled into him, her rag doll dangling from one hand. Something sharp twisted in his heart, a pain so unexpected he nearly stumbled. "Josie," Charlotte gently shook her middle sister. "Wake up, we're here." Josephine stirred, blinking owlishly at the imposing house before them. "Is this heaven?" she murmured sleepily. Mrs. Larson chuckled. "No, child, though I do try to keep it clean as the pearly gates. Come along now." Caleb carried Emma, while Charlotte helped a stumbling Josephine toward the house. Mrs. Larson led them into a large kitchen, dominated by a massive oak table, where a pot of beef stew simmered on the iron stove, filling the air with savory aromas. Sit, the housekeeper urged, pulling out chairs. "Let me dish you up some supper before you waste away to nothing." Caleb gently placed Emma in a chair where she finally stirred. Her eyes opened, the same clear blue as her sister's, and fixed on him with sleepy confusion. "Are we home now?" she asked. Before Caleb could answer, Mrs. Larson placed bowls of steaming stew before each girl, along with thick slices of fresh bread slathered with butter. "Eat first, questions later," the housekeeper instructed. Growing bodies need nourishment. The girls didn't need to be told twice. They ate with the restrained hunger of children who had known real deprivation, but still remembered their manners. Caleb watched them from the doorway, his own appetite forgotten as he considered the situation. 3 orphaned girls with nowhere to go, the neighbor's kin, his responsibility now, at least temporarily. He'd need to write to the county office, perhaps inquire about other relatives back east. The girls would need proper clothes, schooling. "You're thinking too hard," Mrs. Larson murmured, appearing at his side with a cup of coffee. "I can hear the gears grinding from here." "They can't stay, Eleanor," he said quietly, using her first name as he only did in serious moments. "This is no place for children, especially girls." "And why not?" Mrs. Larson challenged. "This house has stood empty too long. The good Lord brings people into our lives for a reason." I'm not looking for divine intervention, Caleb growled. Just doing what needs doing until we find them a proper home. Mrs. Larson studied him with the knowing gaze that had seen through his defenses for 15 years. "We'll see," was all she said before returning to the girls. After the meal, Mrs. Larson showed the sisters to a bedroom upstairs. Caleb heard the floorboards creaking above as they settled in, their soft voices occasionally filtering down through the old house's bones. He sat alone in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at the portrait above the fireplace. Catherine smiled down at him, her painted eyes holding the same warmth they had in life. 8 years gone, yet sometimes the loss felt as fresh as yesterday. "What would you make of this?" he asked the silent canvas. 3 girls landing on our doorstep out of nowhere. The painting offered no answers, but Caleb thought he could guess what Catherine would say. She'd always wanted children, a house full of them. Had planned names for each one they would have. Instead, complications with their first had taken both mother and child, leaving Caleb with an empire and no heir. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Charlotte stood in the doorway, her hair damp from washing, wearing what appeared to be one of Mrs. Larson's nightgowns, rolled up at the sleeves and hem. "Mr. Morgan, I wanted to thank you properly for taking us in." Caleb set down his glass. "No need for thanks, just doing what's right." Charlotte stepped further into the room, her gaze drawn to Catherine's portrait. "Is that your wife?" "Was," Caleb corrected gently. "She passed some years back. I'm sorry." The girl's expression held genuine empathy. "Our mother always said loss makes a family of strangers. That grief recognizes grief." The simple wisdom caught Caleb off guard. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Charlotte's voice wavered slightly. "Will you tell us tomorrow? What happens next, I mean?" Caleb considered the question. "Truth is, I don't rightly know yet, but you and your sisters are safe here while we figure it out. You have my word on that." Relief softened her features. "That's enough for now, then." She turned to go, then paused. "Good night, Mr. Morgan." "Good night, Charlotte." After she left, Caleb returned to his whiskey and his thoughts. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with the promise of coming winter. Inside, for the first time in years, Whispering Pines Ranch didn't feel quite so empty. Dawn broke clear and cold over Whispering Pines. Caleb had been up since before first light, as was his custom, reviewing ledgers in his study when he heard the unfamiliar sound of small feet on the stairs. He looked up to find Charlotte in the doorway, already dressed in yesterday's travel-worn clothes, her wheat blonde hair neatly braided. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said formally. "I wanted to ask what chores you'd like us to start with." Caleb set down his pen. "Chores? Yes, sir, for our keep." Her chin lifted with that same quiet dignity he'd noticed yesterday. "I told you we wouldn't be a burden." "Charlotte," Caleb said carefully, "you and your sisters are guests here, not hired help." A frown creased her forehead. "But we need to earn our way. That's what Mother always taught us." Before Caleb could respond, Mrs. Larson appeared behind Charlotte, carrying a basket of fresh linens. "There you are, child. I was just coming to wake you girls for breakfast." She noticed the tension between them and raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right?" "Miss Charlotte here was asking about chores," Caleb explained. "Were you now?" Mrs. Larson's expression softened. "Well, that's a fine offer, but first things first. Breakfast is nearly ready, and afterward, Mr. Morgan needs to take you into town." "Town?" Charlotte looked confused. Caleb rose from his desk. "You girls need proper clothes and supplies. Can't have you wearing the same things day in and day out." "But we can't." "Charlotte," Caleb interrupted gently, "I understand your pride. It does you credit. But right now, what your sisters need most is stability and care. There'll be time enough for contributing once you're settled." The girl studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing his words against her own sense of obligation. Finally, she nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." "Caleb," he corrected. "If we're going to share a roof, you might as well use my name." After breakfast, during which Emma chattered happily about the size of the pancakes while Josephine remained watchful and quiet, Caleb hitched the wagon for the trip to town. The morning was bright but cold, promising winter's approach with each breath that misted in the air. Mrs. Larson appeared on the porch, carrying 3 woolen shawls. "These were packed away, but they'll keep the chill off until you get proper coats." She wrapped each girl carefully. "And Caleb, don't you dare let Mrs. Haversham talk you into those frilly dresses at her shop. Good, sturdy clothing is what these girls need." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb replied with mock solemnity, earning a rare giggle from Josephine. The trip to Juniper Creek took almost 2 hours, during which Emma peppered Caleb with questions about everything from the horses, do they have names, to the distant mountains, are there bears up there, to his hat, why is it so big? Charlotte occasionally tried to shush her, but Caleb found himself enjoying the child's curiosity. "Let her ask," he told Charlotte. "Questions are how we learn." The town of Juniper Creek had grown considerably in the 8 years since the railroad had come through. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a proper main street with a general store, a bank, a schoolhouse, and various other establishments that served the surrounding ranches. Their first stop was Haversham's Dry Goods, where Mrs. Haversham, a widow who had moved west after losing her husband at Gettysburg, clucked sympathetically over the girls' situation. "Fred Williams' great nieces, you say? Poor dears." She measured each girl efficiently. "They'll need everything, Caleb. Everything. Whatever they need," he agreed, watching as Emma pressed her nose against a glass case containing colorful hair ribbons. For the next 2 hours, they went from shop to shop, acquiring coats, boots, dresses, nightgowns, undergarments, and all the other necessities 3 growing girls required. Caleb paid for everything without comment, though Charlotte's face grew increasingly troubled with each purchase. At the general store, while selecting toiletries, she finally pulled him aside. "Mr. Morgan, Caleb, this is too much. We can't possibly repay you." "I'm not asking for repayment," he said simply. "But why would you do all this for strangers?" Caleb considered the question, surprising himself with his answer. "Because someone once did the same for me when I had nothing. A man named Jacob Grant gave me my first job, my first horse, taught me ranching. I'd have ended up dead or in prison otherwise." He looked down at her serious face. "Sometimes, Charlotte, life gives you a chance to pass on a kindness." Her blue eyes studied him with a wisdom beyond her years. "Mother used to say that kindness leaves echoes." Smart woman, your mother. By the time they finished their shopping, the wagon was filled with packages, and all 3 girls wore new coats and boots. Their last stop was the law office of Benjamin Hayes, the county's only attorney. "I need to file some paperwork regarding the girls," Caleb explained as they approached the modest building. "Won't take but a few minutes." Inside, after introducing the girls to Hayes, Caleb asked them to wait in the outer office while he spoke privately with the lawyer. Hayes's clerk, a young woman named Miss Perkins, offered them peppermint sticks and the latest copy of Harper's Bazaar to look at. Behind the closed door of Hayes's inner office, Caleb got straight to the point. "I need to know my legal obligations here, Ben. 3 orphaned girls, their great-uncle dead, no known relatives." Hayes stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Well, typically they'd become wards of the county, end up in an orphanage in Helena most likely." The thought of Charlotte, Josephine, and Emma in an institutional orphanage made Caleb's jaw tighten. "And if I wanted to prevent that?" "You'd need to petition for guardianship." Hayes studied his old friend carefully. Caleb, are you sure about this? Taking responsibility for 3 children is no small matter, especially for a bachelor. I'm not saying it's permanent, Caleb replied, though something in his chest constricted at the words. But winter's coming. Shipping them off to Helena seems cruel when they've just lost everything. Hayes nodded slowly. I'll draw up temporary guardianship papers. Give you till spring to sort out a more permanent arrangement. When they emerged, Caleb found Charlotte reading aloud to her sisters from the magazine, her voice clear and expressive. She looked up as the men entered, instantly alert to any change in circumstances. Everything all right, Mr. Morgan? Just fine, he assured her, just making sure everything's legal and proper. On the ride back to the ranch, with the girls huddled together beneath new blankets in the wagon bed, Caleb pondered the step he'd just taken. Temporary guardianship. The words felt both weighty and strangely inadequate. He glanced back at the 3 blonde heads, already starting to mean more to him than he'd anticipated. Ahead, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the land he'd built into an empire that, until yesterday, had no future beyond his own lifetime. A week passed at Whispering Pines, each day establishing new rhythms in a household unaccustomed to children. Despite Caleb's insistence that they were guests, not servants, Charlotte had taken it upon herself to help Mrs. Larson with the cooking and cleaning. Josephine, quiet but observant, had discovered the small library off the main parlor and spent hours curled in the window seat with books beyond her years but not beyond her comprehension. Emma, meanwhile, had appointed herself Caleb's shadow, following him whenever possible and peppering him with endless questions about ranch life. The morning frost had barely melted when Caleb found himself showing Emma how to feed the chickens, her small hands careful with the grain scoop he'd cut down to size for her. Gentle now, he instructed as she scattered feed in the coop. Too much in one spot, and they'll fight over it. Emma nodded seriously. Like me and Josie used to fight over the last biscuit at supper. Used to? Caleb raised an eyebrow. Well, now Mrs. Larson makes extra. Emma beamed up at him. She says growing girls need more than skinny cowboys. Caleb chuckled. Mrs. Larson has strong opinions about feeding folks. Mr. Morgan? Emma's voice suddenly turned solemn. Is this our home now? Forever? The question caught him off guard. He knelt to her level, careful not to spill the remaining chicken feed. What makes you ask that, little one? Emma's blue eyes, so like her sister's, were serious. Charlotte says we shouldn't get too comfortable, that sooner or later we'll have to go somewhere else. Her lower lip trembled slightly. But I like it here. I like the chickens and Mrs. Larson's biscuits and the way you tell stories at supper. Something tightened in Caleb's chest, a feeling he couldn't name but recognized as dangerous. Emma, I don't want you worrying about such things. You're safe here for now, and that's what matters. But not forever. Her persistence reminded him of Catherine, who never let him dodge a difficult question. I don't know about forever, he admitted, but not anytime soon. The answer seemed to satisfy her, and she returned to feeding the chickens with renewed enthusiasm. Caleb watched her, troubled by the conversation and what it revealed about Charlotte's state of mind. He found the oldest sister in the kitchen, kneading bread dough beside Mrs. Larson. Her sleeves were rolled up, flour dusting her forearms, her expression one of fierce concentration. Mrs. Larson, Caleb said, might I borrow Charlotte for a moment? The housekeeper nodded, taking over the kneading. This bread won't suffer for a short rest. Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and followed Caleb to the back porch, where the late October sun provided just enough warmth against the autumn chill. Emma tells me you've been preparing the girls for leaving, he said without preamble. Charlotte's face flushed. I've been preparing them for reality, Mr. Morgan. We've been here a week. Your generosity is overwhelming. But I know how the world works. People take in orphans out of duty, not desire. Is that what you think this is? Duty? She looked away. What else would it be? Caleb sighed, leaning against the porch railing. I'll be honest with you, Charlotte. I don't know exactly what this is. I never planned on having 3 girls land in my life. But I do know it's not just duty. Then what is it? Maybe it's a second chance, he said quietly. For all of us. She studied him, clearly trying to gauge his sincerity. Our parents were good people, Mr. Morgan. Father was a professor of literature at the university. Mother taught piano. They never had much money, but we had books and music and, her voice faltered, and each other. And now we have nothing except what others choose to give us. The bitterness in her voice belonged to someone much older. And what's given can be taken away. Charlotte, Caleb said gently, I filed for temporary guardianship in town last week. That means legally you and your sisters stay with me at least until spring. No one can take you away before then. Her eyes widened. You did that? Why didn't you tell us? I'm telling you now. He held her gaze. I wanted to make it official. Make sure you girls were protected. Give us all time to figure out what comes next. For a moment, Charlotte's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath the responsible exterior. Then she straightened her shoulders, rebuilding her walls brick by brick. Thank you, she said formally. I'll tell Josie and Emma. As she turned to go, Caleb called after her. Charlotte, it's all right to let yourself feel safe here. She paused in the doorway, not looking back. I'll try. That afternoon, Caleb rode out with his foreman, Daniel Cooper, to check on the northern pastures where the cattle would winter. Cooper, a weathered man in his 50s who had been with Caleb since the early days, waited until they were well away from the house before speaking his mind. So you've gone and made yourself guardian to 3 orphan girls, he said, not a question, but a statement. Word travels fast, Caleb observed dryly. Small town. Cooper adjusted his hat against the sun. Folks are talking, some saying it's Christian charity, others wondering if you finally lost your mind with grief. And what do you say, old friend? Cooper considered for a long moment. I say I've watched you build this ranch from nothing, turn it into something that would make your father proud. But I've also watched you live like a ghost these past 8 years, going through the motions. He looked Caleb directly in the eye. Maybe those girls are exactly what you need. They need a proper family, Cooper, a mother and father, a house in town near the school. Maybe, Cooper shrugged, or maybe they need exactly what you're giving them, safety, stability, and a man who understands loss. Before Caleb could respond, a shout from behind drew their attention. Josephine was racing toward them on one of the smaller ranch horses, her face pale with panic. Mr. Morgan, she cried, pulling the horse to a sliding stop. Come quick, it's Emma. Caleb's heart dropped. What happened? She was playing in the barn loft and fell. Charlotte sent me to find you. Mrs. Larson says it looks bad. Without hesitation, Caleb swung Josephine up behind him on his horse. Hold tight, he commanded, then spurred his mount into a gallop, leaving Cooper to follow. The ride back to the ranch house was a blur of pounding hooves and rising fear. In just 1 week, these girls had become his responsibility in more than just legal terms. The thought of Emma hurt, possibly seriously, sent a cold dread through him that he hadn't felt since finding Catherine collapsed on their bedroom floor 8 years ago. She was trying to see the kittens, Josephine explained breathlessly, her arms tight around his waist. The barn cat had them in the hay up there. Charlotte told her not to, but it's all right, Caleb cut in, though nothing felt all right. We'll be there soon. As they thundered into the ranch yard, he could already see Mrs. Larson on the porch, her normally composed face tight with worry, and beside her, Charlotte, holding a small, still form wrapped in a blanket. Caleb leapt from his horse before it fully stopped, taking the porch steps 3 at a time. His heart hammered against his ribs as he reached for Emma's still form. "She's breathing," Charlotte said quickly, her voice tight with fear. "But she won't wake up. There's blood." Taking the child in his arms, Caleb could see the crimson stain spreading through the blanket near her head. Head wounds always bled freely, but the stillness of the little girl terrified him more than the blood. "How long has she been unconscious?" he demanded. "Maybe 10 minutes, Mrs. Larson answered. "I found her right after the fall, sent Josephine for you straight away." Caleb gently pulled back the blanket. Emma's face was paper white, a stark contrast to the angry gash above her left temple. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "We need the doctor," he said, already moving toward his horse. "Mrs. Larson, prepare my bed for her. Clean sheets, extra pillows. Charlotte, find clean bandages and boil water." "What are you going to do?" Charlotte asked, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. "I'm taking her to town." Caleb was already calculating. 2 hours to Juniper Creek at normal pace, maybe 1 if he pushed his horse to its limits. "Dr. Hayes is her best chance." "I'm coming with you," Charlotte insisted. "No." Caleb's tone brooked no argument. "You and Josephine stay here with Mrs. Larson. Cooper will be back shortly. He'll ride to the neighboring ranches, let them know we need help." Josephine, who had dismounted and stood trembling by the porch steps, suddenly spoke up. "She fell because of me. I told her where the kittens were. This isn't anyone's fault," Caleb said firmly, though he could see guilt etched on both sisters' faces. "Children have accidents. Now I need to go." Mrs. Larson brought a fresh blanket, wrapping Emma more securely. "Ride careful with her, Caleb. That little one's more precious than you know." Mounting his horse while cradling Emma was a challenge, but Caleb had spent a lifetime in the saddle. He settled the child against his chest, feeling her shallow breaths against his neck. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he told the anxious faces below. "Charlotte, you're in charge. Josephine, stay close to your sister." Then he was gone, pushing his horse to a gallop down the long drive toward town. Emma's small body bounced against him with each stride, and he adjusted his hold to cushion her as much as possible. "Hold on, little one," he murmured into her hair. "Just hold on." The miles blurred beneath them. Caleb's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the precious weight in his arms. He found himself making bargains with a God he'd barely acknowledged since Catherine's death. "Take me instead. Let her live. I'll do anything." When Emma stirred against him and gave a soft moan, the relief nearly unmanned him. "Emma, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. "Hurts," she whimpered. "I know, sweetheart. I'm taking you to the doctor. Just stay with me." "Don't leave me," she mumbled, her small fingers clutching weakly at his coat. "Never," he promised, a word that carried more weight than he intended but felt right nonetheless. Juniper Creek appeared on the horizon, and Caleb urged his lathered horse to one final effort. They thundered down Main Street, drawing startled looks from townsfolk. He pulled up hard outside Dr. Hayes' office, no relation to the lawyer, almost falling from the saddle in his haste. "Doctor!" he shouted, carrying Emma through the door. "Emergency!" Dr. Samuel Hayes emerged from his back room, wiping his hands on a towel. His weathered face showed momentary surprise at seeing Caleb Morgan, then immediate professional concern as he took in the bloodied child. "Bring her in here," he directed, leading the way to an examination room. "What happened?" "Fall from a hayloft. She was unconscious about 20 minutes, came to briefly on the ride in." Caleb gently laid Emma on the table, reluctant to release her even to the doctor's care. Hayes examined the wound with practiced hands, then checked her pupils, breathing, and pulse. "Nasty gash?" probable concussion. He glanced up at Caleb. She yours? The question caught Caleb off guard. I'm her guardian. Her and her sisters. Well, guardian, you got her here in time. Hayes reached for his instruments. She'll need stitches and will need to watch for signs of brain inflammation, but children are remarkably resilient. Relief flooded through Caleb, making his knees weak. He sank into a chair beside the examination table, his hand finding Emma's small one. She'll be all right? Barring complications, yes. Hayes began preparing to clean the wound. Though I'd recommend keeping her here overnight for observation. I'll stay with her, Caleb said immediately. Hayes raised an eyebrow but nodded. Who'd have thought Caleb Morgan would become such a devoted father figure? Times do change. As the doctor worked, stitching the wound with careful precision, Emma stirred again, her eyes finally opening. They were clouded with pain and confusion, but focused immediately on Caleb. Mr. Morgan, she whispered. I'm right here, Emma. Did I get in trouble? Despite everything, Caleb felt a smile tug at his lips. No, little one. You gave us quite a scare, but you're not in trouble. Is the doctor fixing me? That he is. You need to lie very still and let him work. Emma's brow furrowed. Will I have a scar like yours? She reached up toward the thin white line that ran along Caleb's jaw, a souvenir from a range war years before. Maybe a tiny one, Dr. Hayes answered for him, but it'll fade with time, especially on a pretty little girl like you. I don't mind, Emma said solemnly. Scars are stories. That's what Charlotte says about the one on her arm from the fire. Caleb blinked. What fire? The one that burned our apartment in Chicago, before we came here. Emma's eyes were growing heavy again. Charlotte pulled me and Josie out, but the window cut her. This was the first Caleb had heard of any fire. The girls had mentioned their parents dying of influenza, but nothing about losing their home as well. How much more had these children endured? By nightfall, Emma was settled in a recovery room above the doctor's office. Her color had improved, and Hayes pronounced her out of immediate danger, though she'd need careful watching for the next few days. Caleb sent word back to the ranch with a passing cowhand, letting the others know Emma would recover, but they'd stay in town overnight. Then he settled into an uncomfortable chair beside her bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. In sleep, with her golden hair spread across the pillow and her face peaceful despite the bandage, she looked achingly vulnerable. Just a child who'd already lost too much and now bore physical wounds to match the emotional ones. You're safe now, he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. All three of you. As darkness settled over Juniper Creek, Caleb Morgan, cattleman, businessman, widower, kept vigil beside a child who had somehow, in the space of just over a week, become as precious to him as if she were his own flesh and blood. And in the quiet of that small room, he finally admitted to himself what he'd been fighting since finding 3 orphaned girls at the train station. He didn't want to find them another home come spring. He wanted them to stay. Dawn was breaking when Charlotte heard hoofbeats approaching the ranch house. She'd been awake all night, keeping vigil at the window of the bedroom she shared with Josephine, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion around midnight. Now Charlotte carefully disentangled herself from her sister's grip and hurried downstairs, reaching the porch just as Caleb rode in, Emma cradled securely against his chest. Is she... Charlotte couldn't finish the question. She's going to be fine, Caleb assured her, his voice rough with fatigue. The doctor stitched her up and says she'll need rest, but there's no lasting damage. Relief made Charlotte's knees weak. She steadied herself against the porch railing as Mrs. Larson emerged from the house, already fully dressed despite the early hour. Thank the Lord, the housekeeper murmured, reaching for Emma as Caleb dismounted. Let's get her inside where it's warm. Emma stirred as they carried her in, her eyes fluttering open. "Charlotte?" she murmured. "I'm right here." Charlotte moved to her sister's side, taking her small hand. "You gave us quite a scare, little goose." "I saw the kittens," Emma said with the incongruous pride of a child who'd achieved her goal, despite the consequences. "They're gray with white feet." Charlotte choked on a laugh that was half sob. "Was it worth falling and nearly breaking your head open?" "No," Emma admitted. "It hurt a lot, but Mr. Morgan saved me." Charlotte looked up at Caleb, who was watching the exchange with an expression she couldn't quite read, tenderness mixed with something deeper. "Yes," she said softly. "He did." Mrs. Larson carried Emma upstairs to the girls' bedroom, where Josephine was just waking. Charlotte started to follow, but Caleb gently caught her arm. "Charlotte, we need to talk." Her heart dropped. "Here it comes," she thought. "He's realized what a burden we are, the danger, the inconvenience, the expense." "Of course," she said, bracing herself. Caleb led her into his study and closed the door. He looked exhausted, his face stubbled with a day's growth of beard, his clothes rumpled from the long night. But his eyes were clear and determined. "Emma mentioned a fire in Chicago," he said without preamble. "Said you pulled your sisters out through a window, that you were injured." Charlotte instinctively touched her left forearm, where the scar ran from elbow to wrist. "It wasn't as dramatic as she makes it sound." "I'd like to hear the full story, Charlotte. Not just about the fire, but everything you've been through." She hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing their troubles with anyone outside the family. But something in Caleb's steady gaze made her feel safe, safer than she'd felt in a very long time. "The influenza took our father first," she began quietly. "He was gone within days of falling ill. Mother lasted longer, almost 2 weeks. By then we'd spent almost everything on doctors and medicine." Caleb listened silently as she recounted the months that followed, how they'd been evicted from their comfortable home, forced to move to a tenement in a poor district of Chicago. How Charlotte, at 12, had taken odd jobs to keep food on the table. How they'd been living in a single room on the 4th floor when fire broke out in the building. "The stairs were already burning," she explained, her voice detached as if telling someone else's story. "The only way out was through the window onto the fire escape, but it was old, rusted. Part of it gave way when I was helping Emma through." She rubbed her scar absently. "A piece of metal caught me. I barely felt it until we were safe on the ground. And after the fire, we had nowhere to go. That's when I remembered Mother's letters to her uncle, our great-uncle Williams. I wrote to him, told him our situation. A month later, money arrived for train tickets." Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You've been carrying this burden alone for a long time." "They're my sisters," Charlotte said simply, as if that explained everything, and perhaps it did. "You know," Caleb said carefully, "when I filed for guardianship, it was meant to be temporary, a solution until spring when traveling would be easier and more permanent arrangements could be made." Charlotte nodded stiffly, steeling herself for the rejection she'd been expecting. "But I've been thinking," he continued, "this ranch, it's a big place, too big for one man. I built it thinking Catherine and I would fill it with children someday." He paused, and Charlotte saw the old grief pass across his face. "After she died, I kept building, kept expanding, without really knowing why. Now I think maybe I was preparing for something I couldn't foresee." Hope, dangerous and fragile, began to flutter in Charlotte's chest. "Mr. Morgan, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you and your sisters belong here, Charlotte. Not just until spring, for as long as you want to stay." His voice was gruff with emotion. "I'd like to petition the court for permanent guardianship." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Charlotte felt tears threatening, tears she hadn't allowed herself since their mother's funeral. "You barely know us," she whispered. "I know enough," Caleb replied. "I know you're brave and loyal and fierce in protecting what you love. I know Josephine has a mind that devours books the way most children devour candy. And I know Emma sees wonder in everything from chickens to kittens, despite all she's lost." He met Charlotte's eyes directly. "I know you belong here, all three of you." "What if—" Charlotte swallowed hard. "What if we're not what you expect? What if you change your mind?" "Charlotte," Caleb said gently, "when I make a promise, I keep it. That's how I built this ranch, and that's how I intend to build this family." Family. The word resonated through her like a bell. Since their parents' deaths, they'd been three sisters against the world. The thought of expanding that circle, of letting someone else in, was both terrifying and desperately appealing. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Talk to Josie, at least. Emma's too young to understand what this means." "Of course." Caleb nodded. "Take all the time you need. My offer stands." As Charlotte rose to leave, she paused at the door. "Mr. Morgan, thank you. For saving Emma. For everything." "Caleb," he reminded her with a tired smile, "if we're going to be family, you should use my name." "Caleb," she repeated, the name feeling strange but right on her tongue. "Thank you." Upstairs, she found Josephine sitting beside Emma's bed, reading aloud from Treasure Island, while Mrs. Larson arranged a breakfast tray. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so reminiscent of mornings before illness and fire had torn their world apart, that Charlotte felt her careful composure threatening to crack. "Charlotte." Josephine looked up with relief. "Emma's feeling much better. Mrs. Larson says she can have pudding for lunch if she rests well this morning." "That's wonderful," Charlotte managed, moving to sit on Emma's other side. She took her youngest sister's hand, noting the healthy color returning to her cheeks. "How's my brave girl?" "Sleepy," Emma mumbled, "but Mr. Morgan says I'm as tough as a little Mustang." "He's right about that," Charlotte agreed, smoothing Emma's hair back from the bandage. "Is he very angry about me climbing to the loft?" Emma asked worriedly. "No, sweetheart. He's just glad you're safe." Mrs. Larson, who had been quietly arranging the room, paused beside Charlotte. "He rode through the night with her," she said softly. "Never let her go, not even when the doctor was tending her. I've known Caleb Morgan for 15 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you three girls." Charlotte nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "This is your home now," Mrs. Larson continued. "Has been since the moment you stepped through that door, whether he knew it then or not. Home." The word echoed Caleb's earlier one, family, completing a circle Charlotte had thought forever broken. 3 days after Emma's accident, the first snowfall of the season blanketed Whispering Pines. Charlotte stood at the bedroom window, watching as white flakes transformed the landscape into something from a fairy tale. Behind her, Emma sat propped against pillows, her bandage now smaller but still prominent against her fair skin. Josephine was reading to her from Little Women, a book Mrs. Larson had discovered tucked away in a trunk of what had once been Catherine Morgan's belongings. "Look, Emma," Charlotte called softly. "Snow." Emma's eyes widened with delight. "Can we go outside? Make snowmen like we did with Father last winter?" The memory of their father, bundled against the Chicago cold, helping them roll great balls of snow in the small park near their old home, brought a bittersweet pang. "Not today, little goose. You're still recovering, but soon." A knock at the door interrupted them. Caleb entered, carrying a tray with mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream, a special treat Mrs. Larson had prepared. "Thought you girls might like something warm on a cold day," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "How's our patient?" "I'm ever so much better," Emma declared, clearly parroting Dr. Hayes's parting words from yesterday's checkup visit. My head only hurts a tiny bit now. Glad to hear it. Caleb smiled, handing her a mug carefully. Careful, it's hot. Charlotte watched the interaction, still marveling at the transformation in the stern rancher she'd first met at the train station. With Emma, he was gentle and patient. With Josephine, respectful of her quiet nature but encouraging of her sharp mind. And with Charlotte herself, well, he treated her not as a child, but as a partner in caring for her sisters, seeking her opinion on matters concerning them and respecting her authority as the eldest. "Charlotte," Caleb said, drawing her from her thoughts, "I wondered if you might join me for a ride this morning. There's something I'd like to show you. In the snow. It won't be too deep yet, and it's something best seen in the first snowfall." Curiosity piqued, Charlotte agreed. After making sure Emma was comfortable and Josephine was content to continue their reading, she donned the warm clothes Caleb had purchased in town, a proper wool coat, leather gloves, and sturdy boots. In the barn, Caleb had already saddled 2 horses, his own bay gelding and a gentle sorrel mare he'd been teaching Charlotte to ride during the past week. "Where are we going?" she asked as they rode away from the ranch house, snow swirling around them. "There's a ridge about 2 miles east," Caleb replied. "It overlooks the whole valley. My father showed it to me when I was about your age. Said it was the best view in Montana territory." They rode in comfortable silence, Charlotte still getting used to the rhythm of horseback travel but finding it less intimidating each time. The snow continued to fall, dusting their shoulders and the horses' manes with delicate white crystals. "You've been thinking about my offer," Caleb said finally. Not a question, but an observation. "Yes," Charlotte admitted. "I discussed it with Josephine last night after Emma was asleep. And she cried," Charlotte said simply. "I thought at first they were sad tears, but they weren't. She said she's been afraid to hope, afraid to believe we could stay." Caleb nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And what about you, Charlotte? Are you afraid to hope too?" The question was gentle but direct, cutting to the heart of her hesitation. "Yes," she whispered. "Every time we've started to feel safe since our parents died, something has happened to take it away. The eviction, the fire, Uncle Williams's death. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen," Caleb said honestly. "Life doesn't work that way, but I can promise you won't face it alone anymore." They crested a small hill, and the ridge Caleb had mentioned came into view, a natural overlook that jutted out above the valley. He led the way up a narrow trail, Charlotte following carefully. At the top, he dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "Look," he said simply, gesturing toward the vista before them. Charlotte gasped. Below them, the valley stretched for miles in every direction, transformed by snow into a glistening white expanse. The river that bordered whispering pines cut a dark ribbon through the landscape, and beyond it, mountains rose majestically against the gray sky. Directly below, she could see the ranch buildings, smoke curling from the chimneys, cattle gathered in the sheltered pastures. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "This is all Whispering Pines," Caleb said, sweeping his arm to encompass the view. "From the river to those distant hills, 20,000 acres. And beyond that," he pointed to the north, "that was your great-uncle William's property, another 5,000 acres, currently being managed by my foreman since Fred died." Charlotte looked at him, confused. "Why are you showing me this?" Caleb's expression was solemn. "Because I want you to understand what I'm offering. Not just a home, Charlotte, but a legacy. Land that will pass to you and your sisters when I'm gone. A future." The enormity of it struck her with physical force. This wasn't charity or temporary shelter. This was inheritance, belonging, permanence. "You would do that?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Make us your heirs? Who else would I leave it to?" Caleb's smile held a trace of sadness. "I built all this hoping for a family to share it with. Now fate has brought one to my doorstep." Charlotte turned back to the view, trying to process what this meant. Below, Whispering Pines looked like a toy village from this height, yet it represented more wealth and security than she had dared dream of since their parents' deaths. "Your sisters need stability, Charlotte," Caleb continued quietly. "A place to put down roots. So do you, though you're too busy taking care of them to admit it." "And what do you need?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Caleb was silent for a long moment. "For 8 years I've had purpose but not joy. The ranch has been my life, but it's been a lonely one." He looked at her directly. "I need what everyone needs: family, people to care for who care for me in return." The simple honesty of his answer moved her more than grand promises could have. This wasn't charity. It was mutual need, mutual healing. "I think," Charlotte said slowly, "we should accept your offer of permanent guardianship." Relief and something like happiness transformed Caleb's weathered face. "You're sure?" "Yes." She straightened her shoulders, making the decision for all of them. "Whispering Pines is our home now." As if in response, the snow began to fall more heavily, erasing the boundaries between earth and sky, creating a clean white page on which their new story could be written. Winter settled over Whispering Pines, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white that delighted the girls and slowed the pace of daily life. By Christmas, Emma's wound had healed to a thin pink line that would eventually fade to a barely noticeable scar. Josephine had devoured every book in Caleb's library and started a second round, this time making careful notes in a journal Mrs. Larson had given her. And Charlotte, though still watchful and sometimes wary, had begun to relax her vigilance, allowing herself moments of genuine happiness. The change in Caleb was even more remarkable. The ranch hands, who had grown accustomed to their employer's taciturn nature and solitary habits, now found themselves working for a man who smiled more often than not. He'd taken to having breakfast with the girls each morning before heading out to work, and dinner was no longer a quick, silent affair, but a time for sharing stories and plans. "I've been thinking," Caleb announced one evening in mid-January as they sat around the dining table. "Spring will be here before we know it, and with it, the school term." Charlotte looked up from helping Emma cut her roast beef. "We've been discussing that. I've been reviewing lessons with the girls to make sure they haven't fallen too far behind." "That's good," Caleb nodded approvingly. "But Juniper Creek is a 2-hour ride from here, too far for daily travel, especially for Emma." Josephine set down her fork, her face falling. "Does that mean we can't go to school?" "No," Caleb smiled. "It means we need to find a solution. I've been speaking with some of the neighboring ranchers. There are enough children within a 10-mile radius to justify hiring a teacher. We could convert the old bunkhouse into a schoolroom." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You'd build a school? Just like that?" "Not just me. Cooper's working out the details with the Henderson and Blackwell families. We'd share the cost of the teacher's salary. Each family would take turns boarding the teacher for a month at a time." He looked at the girls' surprised faces. "Is that something you'd like?" "Our own school?" Emma clapped her hands in delight. "With other children?" "5 from the Henderson place, 3 from Blackwell's, plus you 3, Caleb confirmed. "And maybe a couple more from the Richardson homestead, though they're further out." Charlotte studied him, a familiar expression that Caleb had come to recognize as her assessment face, weighing his words against her experiences, looking for hidden catches or costs. "That's very generous," she said finally. "It's not just for you. Caleb replied honestly. This is ranching country. Families need education for their children if they're going to put down roots. We should have done this years ago. Mrs. Larson, who had been quietly supervising dinner from her position near the kitchen door, nodded in agreement. God knows I've been telling him that since the first families with young'uns settled nearby. Took you girls to finally make him listen. After dinner, while Mrs. Larson supervised Emma's bath and Josephine disappeared into the library with a new book Caleb had ordered from Chicago, Charlotte helped him clear the table, a task she insisted on despite his protests that it wasn't necessary. There's something else, isn't there? She asked perceptively as they worked. Something about the school you're not saying. Caleb smiled ruefully. Not much gets past you, does it? I've had practice reading people. It was necessary in Chicago, she hesitated, after we were on our own. Caleb nodded, understanding. You're right, there is something else. He set down the plates he was carrying and turned to face her directly. The attorney in town, Benjamin Hayes, has completed the permanent guardianship papers. The hearing is set for next month. Charlotte's hands stilled on the tablecloth she was folding. That's good news, isn't it? It is. But there might be complications. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Charlotte had come to recognize as a sign of his concern. The judge might have questions about the suitability of a bachelor raising 3 young girls. The school would help address that. Show that I'm committed to your education, your future. Understanding dawned on Charlotte's face. You're worried they might not approve the guardianship. I want to be prepared for any objections, Caleb acknowledged. The school is part of that. So is the fact that Mrs. Larson lives here as chaperone and maternal influence. What else can we do? Charlotte asked, practical as always. Caleb hesitated. There's one other matter we should discuss. Your great-uncle's property. What about it? Technically, as his closest living relatives, you and your sisters are his heirs. The ranch has been in limbo since his death, managed by my foreman but not legally settled. Charlotte frowned, but we didn't know him. We never even met him. Doesn't matter under the law. Blood is blood. Caleb leaned against the table. Hayes thinks we should petition to have the property formally transferred to your names, with me as trustee until you come of age. Our own ranch? Charlotte looked stunned. But we don't know anything about ranching. You're learning. Caleb smiled. And you won't have to manage it alone. I'll teach you, the same way Jacob Grant taught me. By the time you're old enough to make decisions about it, you'll know everything you need to. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. This changes things, doesn't it? If we have property of our own, we're not just charity cases. You never were, Caleb said firmly. But yes, it strengthens our position with the court. Shows that I'm not just taking you in out of pity, but helping you claim what's rightfully yours while teaching you to manage it. The practicality of the arrangement appealed to Charlotte's pragmatic nature. Then we should do it, for Emma and Josie's sake. For all your sakes, Caleb corrected gently. You deserve security as much as they do, Charlotte. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Is there more you're not telling me? Caleb sighed. There's been some interest in Williams's property from outside buyers, land speculators from back east. They've been sniffing around, asking questions in town. And that's bad? Could be. These aren't ranchers looking to work the land. They're men who buy cheap and sell dear, with no care for the consequences to the community. His jaw tightened. They've been making noise about contesting any claim you girls might have, arguing that Fred Williams never formally acknowledged you as his kin. Charlotte's eyes flashed with a protective anger Caleb had come to admire. But we have his letters, and the train tickets he sent. Which is why we'll win, Caleb assured her. but it might not be as simple as we'd hoped. February brought the guardianship hearing, and with it, an unexpected snowstorm that nearly prevented them from reaching town. Caleb had insisted they all attend, even Emma, feeling it important that the judge see the family they were becoming. They'd set out before dawn in the large sleigh, bundled in blankets against the biting cold, hot bricks wrapped in flannel at their feet. The courthouse in Juniper Creek was a modest wooden structure that also served as town hall and community gathering place. Inside, a pot-bellied stove radiated welcome heat as Caleb ushered the girls to the front bench. Mrs. Larson had accompanied them, sitting primly beside Charlotte, her presence a testament to the propriety of the arrangement. "All rise," called the clerk, as Judge Wilson entered from his chambers. Charlotte felt Emma's small hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. On her other side, Josephine sat ramrod straight, her expression solemn. This moment would determine their future. A decision made by a stranger in a black robe who knew nothing of their journey or the bonds they'd formed at Whispering Pines. "Petition for permanent guardianship," the judge announced, reviewing the papers before him. Caleb Morgan seeking guardianship of Charlotte, Josephine, and Emma Williams. He peered over his spectacles. "Mr. Morgan, approach the bench." Caleb moved forward, his usual commanding presence somehow more pronounced in his Sunday suit and polished boots. Charlotte had never seen him dressed so formally, and the transformation was striking. No longer just the rugged rancher, but a man of substance and standing in the community. "Mr. Morgan," Judge Wilson began, "I've reviewed your petition carefully. Your credentials as a property owner and businessman are impeccable. However, I have concerns about a bachelor raising 3 young girls, particularly one with no prior experience as a parent." "I understand your concerns, Your Honor," Caleb replied steadily, "but these children need a home, stability, and someone who cares for their welfare. I can provide all 3. "So can an orphanage in Helena," the judge countered, "where they would have female supervision and proper schooling." Charlotte felt her heart sink. This was exactly what they'd feared, the judge seeing only the conventional arrangement, not the family they'd become. "If I may, Your Honor," Caleb said, his voice taking on an intensity Charlotte had rarely heard. "These girls have already lost their parents, their home in Chicago, and most recently their great-uncle who promised to care for them. They've been uprooted enough. At Whispering Pines, they've begun to heal, to trust again." He gestured toward Mrs. Larson. "They have maternal guidance from my housekeeper, who has been with me for 15 years. They'll have proper education at the school we're establishing for children of neighboring ranches." The judge seemed unmoved. "Commendable, but—" "And there's the matter of their inheritance," Caleb continued. "As Frederick Williams's closest living relatives, they stand to inherit his ranch. I've been teaching them ranching operations, preparing them to manage their property when they come of age. Sending them to an orphanage would effectively deprive them of their birthright." This caught the judge's attention. "The Williams property? I wasn't aware that had been settled." "We've filed the appropriate paperwork," Caleb confirmed. "There are interested buyers pressing their case, but the girls' claim is stronger, especially with the documentation we have of Williams's invitation to them." Before the judge could respond, the courtroom door burst open. A tall man in an expensive Eastern suit strode in, followed by Benjamin Hayes, who looked apologetic. "Your Honor," the newcomer announced without preamble, "I'm Elliot Chambers, representing Western Land Development Corporation. We have a vested interest in these proceedings as they directly impact our claim on the Williams property." Caleb's expression darkened. "This is a guardianship hearing, Chambers. Your land grab has no bearing here." "On the contrary," Chambers smiled thinly. "If these children are sent to the state orphanage, their claim on the Williams property becomes considerably easier to contest. My clients have already filed an alternative claim, based on a purported agreement with Frederick Williams before his death. The naked calculation in the man's voice, his willingness to separate the sisters and send them to an institution simply to ease his company's acquisition of their land, sent a surge of protective anger through Charlotte. Before she could stop herself, she was on her feet. "Your Honor, may I speak?" All eyes turned to her, including the judge's surprised ones. "Young lady, this is irregular, but proceed." Charlotte squared her shoulders, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed. "My sisters and I have lost everything. Our parents, our home, our security. Mr. Morgan has given us all of that back. He's not just providing shelter. He's teaching us to be strong, to manage what's ours by right." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "That man," she pointed at Chambers, "doesn't care about what's best for us. He only wants our great-uncle's land. But Mr. Morgan cares about us. He stayed up all night when Emma was hurt. He's teaching Josephine about the books she loves. He's showing me how to manage accounts and run a ranch." She took a deep breath. "We belong at Whispering Pines, with Mr. Morgan. He's the closest thing to a father we've had since we lost our own." The courtroom fell silent. Even Chambers seemed taken aback by the fierce conviction in her young voice. The judge studied her thoughtfully, then looked at Josephine and Emma, who had moved to stand beside their sister in silent solidarity. "Mr. Morgan," the judge said finally, "would you say you've developed a paternal attachment to these children?" Caleb's gaze moved from the judge to the three girls standing together. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a certainty. "Yes, Your Honor," he said quietly. "I love them as if they were my own daughters." It was the first time he'd used that word, love, and Charlotte felt it resonate through her like a physical force. Beside her, Emma let out a small, happy sound, while Josephine's hand tightened on her arm. The judge nodded slowly. "Mr. Chambers, while I appreciate your interest in these proceedings, this court is concerned with the welfare of these children, not property disputes. Those will be addressed in separate hearings." He shuffled his papers decisively. "Having heard from all parties, I am granting Caleb Morgan's petition for permanent guardianship of Charlotte, Josephine, and Emma Williams." He looked directly at the girls. "You young ladies are fortunate to have found someone who cares for you so deeply. I suggest you remember that in the years ahead." The ride back to Whispering Pines was jubilant despite the worsening weather. Emma chattered excitedly about being officially part of the family now. Josephine, typically reserved, smiled more than Charlotte had seen in months, and Mrs. Larson dabbed suspiciously at her eyes, muttering about the wind making them water. Only Caleb seemed quieter than usual, thoughtful as he guided the horses through deepening snow. When they stopped briefly to rest the team, he helped Charlotte down from the sleigh to stretch her legs. "Did you mean it?" she asked quietly, away from the others. "What you said in court about loving us?" Caleb's eyes, weathered at the corners from years of sun and wind, met hers directly. "Every word. You three have brought life back to Whispering Pines, back to me." Charlotte nodded, a lump in her throat preventing speech. Then, in a gesture that would have been unimaginable months ago, she stepped forward and hugged him tightly. After a moment's surprise, his arms came around her, strong, secure, safe. Spring came to Montana with a sudden, determined ferocity, as if making up for winter's long grip. The snow melted in great rushing torrents that swelled the river bordering Whispering Pines, and almost overnight, the brown landscape transformed into vibrant green. With the changing season came the completion of the schoolhouse built from the converted bunkhouse as Caleb had promised. The teacher, Miss Adeline Porter, a serious young woman from Minnesota, had arrived on the afternoon train and taken up residence at the Henderson place for her first month. On a bright April morning, Charlotte stood on the porch watching Emma and Josephine get ready for their first day of school. Josephine was carefully arranging books in her new satchel, while Emma twirled to show off her dress, her hair done up in ribbons by Mrs. Larson's expert hands. "Do I look smart enough for school?" Emma asked, the scar on her temple now just a faint line almost hidden by her blonde curls. "The smartest," Charlotte assured her with a smile. At 13, Emma's boundless energy and curiosity had fully returned after her accident, perhaps even amplified by her near miss. Caleb emerged from the barn leading 3 horses, his bay gelding, Charlotte's sorrel mare, and a gentle dappled pony he'd purchased specifically for Josephine and Emma to share for the ride to school. "Everyone ready?" he called. "Miss Porter doesn't look like the type who appreciates tardiness." The ride to the schoolhouse took 15 minutes along a path Caleb had cleared through the property. 5 other children were already there when they arrived, the Henderson siblings ranging from 16 down to 7, and 2 of the Blackwell boys, both around Josephine's age. Charlotte felt a curious mix of emotions watching her sisters enter the schoolhouse with the other children. Pride in how far they'd come from those desperate days in Chicago. Nostalgia for her own interrupted education, and a bittersweet awareness that she, at almost 17, was too old to join them in the classroom. "You're thinking too hard again," Caleb observed as they rode back toward the ranch house. "I can hear the gears turning from here." Charlotte smiled at his gentle teasing. "Just thinking about all the changes. Good changes, I hope." "The best," she agreed. "But I do miss learning sometimes. Father had planned for me to attend college eventually." Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "There's no reason you can't still pursue that, you know. There are women's colleges back east, or we could arrange for tutoring here if you prefer." The casual way he presented these options, as if her dreams were not only possible but expected to be fulfilled, was still something Charlotte was getting used to. In the months since the guardianship had become permanent, Caleb had consistently treated her ambitions as seriously as he might a son's. "I'd like that," she said, "though not yet. There's still so much to learn about ranching, especially with the Williams property." The mention of her great-uncle's ranch brought a more serious expression to Caleb's face. "That reminds me, Benjamin Hayes sent word yesterday. The Land Commission has set a date to hear Western Land Development's claim against yours." Charlotte's hands tightened on her reins. Despite Judge Wilson's ruling in their favor at the guardianship hearing, Elliot Chambers and his company had persisted in their efforts to seize the Williams property, producing a document they claimed was an agreement to sell, signed by Frederick Williams shortly before his death. "Do you think they'll win?" she asked quietly. "No." Caleb's voice held firm conviction. "The document they've produced is suspicious at best, fraudulent at worst. Hayes is bringing in a handwriting expert from Denver to testify." They rode in companionable silence until they crested the hill overlooking the eastern pastures. Below them, spring calves frolicked alongside their mothers, their spindly legs carrying them in joyous, awkward circles. "I've been thinking," Caleb said suddenly, "about the future, about what happens when you girls are grown." Charlotte glanced at him, surprised by the shift in conversation. "That's years away, especially for Emma." "Not so many for you," he pointed out. "In another year you'll be 18, legally an adult, able to make your own decisions." Something in his tone made Charlotte study him more carefully. "Are you worried I'll leave?" Caleb adjusted his hat, a gesture she now recognized as buying time to organize his thoughts. "I'd understand if you wanted to. You've had to grow up too fast, take on responsibilities no child should bear. Now that Josie and Emma are settled, you might want your own life. College, maybe, or what? Marriage," he said simply. "You're becoming a beautiful young woman, Charlotte. Won't be long before the young men around here start calling." The thought had honestly never occurred to her. Since their parents' deaths, her focus had been entirely on survival, on keeping her sisters safe. The idea of courting, of building a life with someone else, seemed as foreign as the moon. "I haven't thought about that," she admitted. "But even if I did someday marry or go to college, this would still be home. You, Mrs. Larson, Whispering Pines, we're family now, aren't we?" The relief in Caleb's eyes was answer enough. "Yes, we are." They had reached the river that marked the boundary between Whispering Pines and what was now officially the Williams Ranch. The spring melt had turned it from its usual gentle flow into a rushing torrent, water churning white over rocks and fallen logs. "I should check the bridge," Caleb said, referring to the wooden structure that connected the two properties. This much water could have weakened the supports. As they approached, Charlotte could see immediately that the situation was worse than anticipated. Half the bridge had been washed away, leaving splintered planks dangling precariously over the churning water. "Stay back," Caleb warned, dismounting to inspect the damage. The banks could be unstable. Charlotte obeyed, watching anxiously as he tested the remaining structure. Suddenly, a crack like a gunshot split the air. The bank beneath Caleb's feet gave way, sending him sliding toward the raging water. "Caleb!" she screamed, leaping from her horse. He managed to grab a jutting root, halting his descent, but leaving him dangling precariously above the torrent. "Stay back!" he shouted again. "Get help!" But Charlotte could see his grip weakening, his fingers slipping on the wet root. There was no time for help. Instead, she grabbed the lariat from her saddle, the one Caleb had insisted she learn to use properly, and secured it to her horse's saddle horn. "Hold on," she called, tossing the loop with the skill he'd taught her. It landed perfectly around his shoulders and upper chest. "I've got you." Using her horse as an anchor, she slowly, steadily pulled him to safety. When he finally crawled onto solid ground, they both collapsed in exhausted relief. "That was too close," he gasped, still catching his breath. "Good thing you taught me about horses and ropes," she replied shakily. Caleb looked at her with a mixture of pride and amazement. "You saved my life, Charlotte." "You saved ours first," she said simply. "That's what family does." As they remounted to return home, the sun breaking through clouds to illuminate the valley below, Caleb turned to her with a smile that erased years from his weathered face. "Get on my horse now, miss," he said, patting the space behind him on his larger mount, his voice warm with paternal affection. "That mare of yours deserves a rest after her heroics, and I think we should tell your sisters what a remarkable big sister they have." Side by side, they rode toward home, not just a house or a ranch, but the place where four broken souls had found each other and become whole again.